Captain James Morrison had served the British royal family for 15 years. Every morning at dawn he walked through the grand corridors of Kensington Palace, checking security protocols and ensuring the safety of the royal children. His weathered hands carried the weight of responsibility, and his sharp eyes missed nothing. The palace staff respected him deeply, knowing that behind his stern exterior lived a man who genuinely cared about protecting the future of the monarchy. Prince George, now 12 years old, had grown accustomed to seeing Captain Morrison's familiar figure during his daily routines. The young prince would often catch glimpses of the guard during breakfast, walking to his tutoring sessions or playing in the palace gardens. Though they rarely spoke directly, George had developed a quiet curiosity about the man who seemed to watch over him like a guardian angel. Morrison's dedication went beyond his professional duties. He had memorized every entrance, every window, and every possible security risk within the palace grounds. His team of guards looked up to him as a father figure, someone who had trained them not just in protection techniques, but in understanding the delicate balance between security and allowing the royal children to experience some normalcy in their extraordinary lives. The captain's personal life had always taken second place to his royal duties. His own children had grown up seeing their father leave early and return late, always placing the royal family's safety above his own family gatherings. His wife Margaret had learned to understand this commitment, though she sometimes worried about the toll it took on her husband's health and happiness. On this particular autumn morning, Morrison noticed something different in Prince George's demeanor. The young prince seemed more thoughtful than usual, pausing longer at windows and appearing to study the people around him with unusual intensity. Morrison made a mental note to keep a closer eye on the prince, sensing that something important might be developing beneath the surface of the boy's calm exterior. The palace buzzed with its usual activity as staff members prepared for the day's royal engagements. Morrison coordinated with other security personnel, reviewed the day's schedule, and ensured that every detail was perfectly planned. He had no idea that this seemingly ordinary day would mark the beginning of a series of events that would challenge everything he believed about duty, loyalty, and the true meaning of service. Prince George, meanwhile, had been quietly observing the palace dynamics for weeks. His young mind was processing the complex relationships between the staff members, the guards, and his own family. He had begun to notice things that adults often overlooked, particularly the sacrifices made by those who dedicated their lives to serving the royal household. As the morning progressed, Morrison felt an unusual tension in the air. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt different about this day. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but he remained alert, ready to respond to any situation that might arise. Little did he know that the most significant challenge of his career was about to come, not from an external threat, but from the wisdom and compassion of a 12-year-old prince. The stage was set for a confrontation between duty and conscience, between tradition and humanity, between the rigid protocols of royal security and the innocent yet profound observations of a young boy who was learning what it truly meant to lead with both strength and kindness. Prince George had always been an observant child, but lately his attention had focused on Captain Morrison with growing concern. During his morning walks through the palace, George noticed how the captain's shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. The prince observed how Morrison would sometimes pause in empty hallways, rubbing his temples as if fighting off a headache that never seemed to go away. The young prince had overheard conversations between palace staff about Morrison's long hours and his reluctance to take time off. George learned that the captain hadn't taken a proper vacation in over 3 years, always insisting that his presence was essential for the family's safety. This information troubled the prince more than anyone realized, sparking thoughts about the people who sacrificed so much for his family's protection. During his tutoring sessions, George found himself distracted by thoughts of Captain Morrison's dedication. His history teacher spoke about great leaders throughout time, but George couldn't help thinking about the quiet leadership he witnessed daily from the palace guard. Morrison never sought recognition or praise, yet he commanded respect through his actions and unwavering commitment to duty. One afternoon, while playing in the palace gardens, George witnessed a moment that would stay with him forever. He saw Captain Morrison speaking softly to a young guard who appeared upset about making a minor mistake during a security check. Instead of harsh criticism, Morrison offered patient guidance and encouragement. George realized that the captain wasn't just protecting the royal family. He was also mentoring and caring for his entire team. The prince began to notice other details about Morrison's character. He observed how the captain would discreetly check on elderly palace staff members, ensuring they weren't overworked. George saw him quietly arranging for flowers to be sent to a guard's wife who was in the hospital. These small acts of kindness painted a picture of a man whose heart was as big as his sense of duty. George's curiosity led him to ask subtle questions during family dinners. He learned from his parents about Morrison's exemplary service record and his reputation as one of the most trusted members of the palace staff. His father spoke with genuine respect about the captain's intelligence and reliability, while his mother mentioned Morrison's thoughtfulness in understanding the unique challenges of raising children in the royal spotlight. As days passed, Prince George's admiration for Captain Morrison grew stronger. He began to understand that true leadership wasn't just about giving orders or maintaining authority. It was about caring for others, making sacrifices for the greater good, and never forgetting one's humanity even in the most formal circumstances. These realizations were shaping the young prince's understanding of what it meant to serve others. The prince started to feel a growing sense of responsibility toward the people who dedicated their lives to serving his family. He wondered if there was something he could do to show appreciation for their sacrifices. George's young mind began formulating ideas, though he wasn't yet sure how to express his gratitude in a meaningful way. One evening, as George looked out his bedroom window and saw Captain Morrison doing his final security rounds of the day, the prince made a decision that would surprise everyone. He realized that sometimes the most powerful actions come not from speaking loudly, but from making choices that demonstrate deep respect and understanding for others. The wheels of change had begun turning in the mind of a boy who was learning to think like a future king. The relationship between Prince George and Captain Morrison began to evolve in subtle ways that neither of them initially recognized. It started with small gestures that spoke volumes about the growing mutual respect between them. George would offer a polite nod when their paths crossed, and Morrison would respond with a slight smile that seemed to brighten his usually serious expression. During a palace tour for visiting dignitaries, George noticed how expertly Captain Morrison coordinated the security arrangements while remaining nearly invisible to the guests. The prince watched in fascination as Morrison anticipated potential problems and solved them before they could develop. George began to appreciate the incredible skill and experience required to make such complex operations appear effortless. One rainy afternoon, George was reading in the palace library when he overheard Captain Morrison speaking with his deputy about a security concern. The conversation revealed Morrison's deep, analytical mind and his ability to think several steps ahead of potential threats. George realized that protecting the royal family required not just physical courage, but also intellectual brilliance and constant vigilance. The prince started finding excuses to be in areas where he might encounter Captain Morrison during his rounds. These brief meetings allowed George to observe the captain's interactions with other staff members. He noticed how Morrison treated everyone with dignity, regardless of their position in the palace hierarchy. The captain's fairness and respect for others made a profound impression on the young prince. George's parents began to notice their son's increased interest in the palace staff and security arrangements. When they asked about his curiosity, George spoke thoughtfully about wanting to understand how the palace operated and who made it all possible. His mature perspective on these matters surprised and pleased his parents, who saw signs of the thoughtful leader their son was becoming. Captain Morrison, for his part, began to notice the prince's growing awareness of the people around him. During security briefings, Morrison would occasionally catch sight of George observing the proceedings from a distance. The captain was impressed by the boy's respectful attention and his apparent understanding that these activities were serious matters requiring careful consideration. One memorable morning, Prince George was walking through the palace when he encountered Captain Morrison helping an elderly maintenance worker who had dropped some tools. Without hesitation, George joined in picking up the scattered items. The three of them worked together quietly, and Morrison was struck by the prince's natural instinct to help others without considering it beneath his royal status. This simple incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Morrison began to see Prince George not just as a young royal to be protected, but as a person of genuine character who understood the value of service to others. George, meanwhile, recognized in Morrison the qualities he hoped to embody as he grew into his future role as king. Their conversations, though still brief and formal, began to carry more weight. George would ask thoughtful questions about security procedures, not out of mere curiosity, but from a genuine desire to understand the complexities of protecting a royal household. Morrison found himself explaining concepts with greater detail, appreciating the prince's intelligent questions and mature perspective. The palace staff began to notice the positive dynamic developing between Prince George and Captain Morrison. Their interactions served as an example of mutual respect that transcended traditional hierarchies. Other staff members found themselves inspired by the prince's gracious treatment of the security team and Morrison's patient guidance of the young royal's growing understanding of palace operations. As autumn deepened into winter, both Prince George and Captain Morrison sensed that their relationship was building towards something significant. Neither could have predicted exactly what form this would take, but both felt the importance of the bond they were developing. The foundation was being laid for a moment that would test everything they had learned about duty, respect, and the true meaning of leadership. Prince George's understanding of Captain Morrison's sacrifices reached a critical point during a conversation he overheard between palace staff members. They were discussing Morrison's recent refusal to attend his own daughter's university graduation because it conflicted with an important royal engagement. The prince learned that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern where Morrison consistently chose duty over personal milestones. The weight of this revelation settled heavily on George's young shoulders. He began to imagine what it must feel like to miss such important family moments in service to others. The prince started to question whether such extreme sacrifices were truly necessary, or if they represented an imbalance that needed to be addressed. His developing sense of justice was troubled by the idea that good people were paying such a high personal price for their loyalty. During his private tutoring sessions, George found himself asking his instructors about leadership philosophy and the responsibilities of those in power toward the people who serve them. His teachers were impressed by the depth of his questions and his genuine concern for others' welfare. These discussions helped George understand that true leadership involves recognizing and valuing the contributions of everyone in an organization. George began to observe other long-serving palace staff members with new eyes. He noticed signs of fatigue and stress that he had previously overlooked. The prince realized that many of these dedicated individuals were quietly making significant personal sacrifices without complaint or recognition. This awareness created a growing sense of responsibility within him to acknowledge and address these situations. One evening, while reflecting on his observations, Prince George made a decision that surprised even himself. He realized that he possessed something that could make a meaningful difference in Captain Morrison's life: the power of his position and the respect it commanded. George understood that sometimes leadership meant making difficult choices that others might not immediately understand. The prince began to formulate a plan that would require considerable courage and conviction. He knew that his actions would likely surprise and possibly concern the adults around him, but he felt compelled to act on his growing understanding of fairness and justice. George's plan was simple in concept, but profound in its implications for how the royal household operated. George spent several days carefully considering the potential consequences of his decision. He thought about how Captain Morrison might react, how his parents would respond, and what message his actions would send to the palace staff. Despite these concerns, the prince felt certain that he needed to take a stand for what he believed was right. The young prince also considered the broader implications of his decision. He understood that his actions could set a precedent for how the royal family interacted with their staff in the future. This awareness added weight to his choice, but also strengthened his resolve to act according to his developing principles of leadership and compassion. As George prepared to implement his plan, he drew strength from the example that Captain Morrison had unknowingly provided. The captain's quiet dedication and selfless service had taught the prince valuable lessons about putting others' needs first. Now George wanted to apply those lessons in a way that would honor Morrison's sacrifice while also addressing what the prince saw as an unfair situation. The decision that Prince George was about to make would test the traditional boundaries of royal protocol and challenge long-established ways of thinking about duty and service. He knew that his choice might be controversial, but he also believed that sometimes progress required brave individuals to take stands for what they believed was right. On a cold December morning, as snow began to fall on the palace grounds, Prince George prepared to set his plan in motion. He had thought through every aspect of his decision and was ready to face whatever consequences might follow. The young prince was about to demonstrate that wisdom and courage could emerge from the most unexpected sources, and that even a 12-year-old could make choices that would impact the lives of others in profound and lasting ways. On a crisp winter morning, Prince George walked purposefully through the palace corridors with an unusual sense of determination. He had made his decision, and today would be the day he acted upon it. The young prince had chosen a moment when Captain Morrison would be conducting his regular morning security briefing with the other guards, knowing that this timing would ensure the maximum impact of his gesture. George approached the security office quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the polished marble floors. Through the partially open door, he could see Captain Morrison standing before a group of guards, discussing the day's protocols with his characteristic attention to detail. The prince took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to do would surprise everyone in the room. Without announcing himself or asking for permission, Prince George stepped into the security office. The conversation immediately stopped as all the guards turned to acknowledge his presence, automatically standing at attention as protocol required. Captain Morrison's eyes widened with surprise and concern, wondering if there was some emergency that had brought the prince to this usually off-limits area. What happened next left everyone in the room speechless. Prince George, with the quiet dignity that would one day make him a king, approached Captain Morrison directly. Looking the captain straight in the eyes, George did something unprecedented. He performed a formal, respectful bow before the startled guard. It wasn't the casual nod that royals might give to acknowledge someone, but a deep, meaningful bow that conveyed profound respect and gratitude. The silence in the room was profound. Captain Morrison stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to such an unexpected gesture from a member of the royal family. The other guards watched in amazement, witnessing something they had never seen before and might never see again. Prince George held his bow for several seconds, ensuring that everyone understood the sincerity and importance of his action. When George finally straightened, he looked directly at Captain Morrison and spoke words that would echo in the captain's heart for the rest of his life. "Thank you, Captain Morrison, for everything you have sacrificed for my family. Your service has not gone unnoticed, and your dedication will never be forgotten." His voice was clear and steady, carrying a maturity that belied his 12 years. Captain Morrison's eyes began to fill with tears as the full impact of the prince's gesture settled over him. In 15 years of service, he had received commendations, promotions, and official recognition, but nothing had ever touched him as deeply as this simple act of personal acknowledgement from the young prince. The captain struggled to find words adequate to respond to such unexpected and heartfelt recognition. The other guards in the room watched this exchange with growing emotion. Many of them had served alongside Morrison for years, witnessing his sacrifices and dedication without ever seeing him receive such personal recognition. Prince George's action had not only honored their captain, but had also acknowledged the struggles and sacrifices that all of them made in service to the royal family. George continued to stand before Captain Morrison, his presence radiating a quiet strength that commanded attention. The prince's action had transformed the formal security office into a sacred space, where genuine human connection transcended traditional hierarchies and protocols. The artificial barriers between royal and servant had momentarily dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. As the moment extended, Captain Morrison finally managed to find his voice. "Your Highness, I am deeply honored by your words and your gesture. It has been my privilege to serve your family." His voice was thick with emotion, and the other guards could see how profoundly the prince's recognition had affected their respected leader. Prince George nodded solemnly, understanding that his mission had been accomplished. He had successfully communicated his gratitude and respect in a way that would be remembered by everyone present. The young prince had demonstrated that true leadership involved recognizing and honoring the contributions of others, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. The impact of Prince George's silent decision would ripple through the palace for days to come, changing how people thought about service, recognition, and the relationships between those who serve and those who are served. The prince had used his position not for personal gain, but to lift up someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others. Captain Morrison left the security office that morning, with his entire worldview fundamentally changed. Prince George's unexpected gesture had awakened something within him that had been buried under years of rigid duty and protocol. For the first time in his long career, the captain began to question whether his extreme dedication was truly necessary or if it had become an unhealthy obsession that was costing him too much. Throughout the day, Morrison found himself unable to concentrate on his usual tasks. The image of the young prince bowing before him kept replaying in his mind, along with the sincere words of gratitude that had accompanied the gesture. The captain realized that in all his years of service, he had never stopped to consider whether his sacrifices were being noticed or appreciated by the family he protected. During his lunch break, Morrison did something unusual. He called his wife, Margaret. For the first time in months, they had a real conversation about his work and its impact on their family life. Margaret was surprised by her husband's reflective mood and his willingness to discuss the personal costs of his dedication to the royal family. She had waited years for him to acknowledge what his service was taking from their own family. Morrison's fellow guards noticed a change in their captain's demeanor throughout the day. While he remained professional and attentive to his duties, there was a thoughtfulness about him that hadn't been there before. Several guards commented privately that Captain Morrison seemed to be carrying himself differently, as if some invisible burden had been lifted from his shoulders. That evening, Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested a meeting with the head of palace administration to discuss his work schedule and responsibilities. For the first time in his career, the captain wanted to explore whether it might be possible to maintain security, excellence while also allowing time for personal commitments and family obligations. The meeting with palace administration proved to be more productive than Morrison had expected. Officials acknowledged that the captain's dedication had been extraordinary, perhaps even excessive by normal standards. They admitted that they had become accustomed to Morrison's willingness to sacrifice personal time and had not adequately considered the long-term sustainability of such an arrangement. Morrison spent that evening at home having the most honest conversation with his family that they had shared in years. His children, now young adults, expressed their appreciation for his dedication, but also shared how his absence had affected important moments in their lives. Margaret spoke gently about the loneliness she had experienced and her concerns about her husband's health and happiness. As the captain reflected on these conversations, he began to understand that Prince George's gesture had given him permission to reassess his priorities. The young prince had shown that recognition and appreciation were important, but Morrison realized that balance and sustainability were equally crucial for long-term effective service. Over the following days, Morrison worked with palace officials to develop a more balanced approach to his responsibilities. This included cross-training other guards to handle certain duties, establishing clearer boundaries around emergency versus routine coverage, and ensuring that the captain would be able to attend important family events without compromising security. The changes Morrison implemented had a positive ripple effect throughout the security team. Other guards began to feel more confident in their abilities and more valued for their contributions. The captain's willingness to delegate certain responsibilities actually strengthened the overall security operation by developing the skills and confidence of his team members. Morrison also made an effort to spend more time with individual guards, mentoring them not just in security procedures but also in maintaining healthy work-life balance. He shared his own recent insights about the importance of sustainable service and the value of personal relationships. Outside of work, the captain's transformation became a source of inspiration for palace staff throughout the household. Word spread about Prince George's gesture and Morrison's response to it, creating discussions about recognition, appreciation, and balance that extended far beyond the security department. As Christmas approached, Morrison felt a sense of peace and purpose that had been missing from his life for years. He realized that Prince George's silent decision had not only honored his service but had also freed him to serve more effectively by taking better care of himself and his relationships. The captain understood that sustainable service required both dedication and wisdom about personal limits and needs. 6 months after Prince George's profound gesture, the atmosphere throughout the palace had undergone a remarkable transformation. Captain Morrison's decision to pursue better work-life balance had inspired similar changes throughout the royal household staff. Palace officials had implemented new policies, ensuring that all long-serving employees could maintain their dedication while also nurturing their personal lives and family relationships. Prince George continued his education with a new understanding of leadership that would serve him well in his future role. His teachers noticed his increased interest in studying historical examples of leaders who had demonstrated compassion and wisdom in their treatment of others. The young prince had learned that sometimes the most powerful leadership actions are quiet gestures that affirm the dignity and worth of every individual. Captain Morrison became an advocate for sustainable service within the royal household. He established mentorship programs for new guards and staff members, teaching them not only their professional duties but also the importance of maintaining personal relationships and taking care of their own well-being. His approach created a more resilient and effective team that could serve the royal family for years to come. The story of Prince George's bow spread throughout the palace community, becoming a legend that was shared with new employees as an example of the values that the royal family represented. Staff members spoke with pride about working for a family that recognized and valued their contributions, creating a culture of mutual respect that enhanced everyone's commitment to excellence. Morrison's family life flourished as he learned to balance his professional responsibilities with his personal relationships. He attended his son's graduation ceremony later that year, and his presence meant more to his family than any amount of overtime or professional recognition ever could. The captain discovered that being fully present for important personal moments actually enhanced his effectiveness in his professional role. Prince George's parents were deeply proud of their son's wisdom and compassion. They recognized that his gesture had demonstrated the kind of thoughtful leadership that would serve him well as a future king. The incident became a teaching moment for the entire royal family about the importance of acknowledging and appreciating the people who dedicate their lives to service. The relationship between Prince George and Captain Morrison evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding that transcended traditional protocol. While maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, they had developed a connection based on shared values of service, dedication, and respect for others. Their interaction served as a model for how people of different positions could relate to each other with dignity and genuine appreciation. Other members of the royal security team found inspiration in Morrison's example and began to develop more balanced approaches to their own service. The security operation actually became more effective as team members felt more valued, more rested, and more motivated to excel in their responsibilities. The department developed a reputation as an excellent place to work, attracting high-quality candidates who wanted to be part of such a positive culture. As Prince George grew older, he continued to apply the lessons learned from his interaction with Captain Morrison. He made it a practice to personally thank staff members for their service, to learn about their families and interests, and to consider the human impact of royal policies and decisions. These habits would shape his approach to leadership throughout his life. Years later, when Captain Morrison finally retired after 25 years of distinguished service, Prince George delivered a personal speech at his retirement ceremony. The prince spoke eloquently about the captain's dedication and the lessons he had learned from Morrison's example. The captain's eyes filled with tears, once again as he realized that a single moment of recognition had led to a lifetime of meaningful connection and mutual respect. The legacy of that winter morning when a 12-year-old prince chose to bow before a devoted guard continued to influence the palace culture for generations. It became a reminder that true leadership involves recognizing the humanity in others, that service should be sustainable and appreciated, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with simple gestures of respect and gratitude. Captain Morrison's resignation never came to pass, not because his dedication had gone unrecognized, but because his service had been honored and his humanity had been affirmed. Prince George's silent yet strong decision had saved not just a career, but had transformed an entire approach to leadership, service, and human dignity within the walls of the palace.